Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Pranams to my gurus, my acharya, and especially my guide, Dr. Hegde, and to all my fellow seekers. A special thanks to all at School of Ancient Wisdom for this opportunity. Dr. Rekha and I will present chapter 9 of Bhagvadgita to you as fellow seekers. Next slide. To understand, the understanding of God varies according to our maturity. Most of humanity does not even give much thought to God, and they're very vague about him and maybe move towards him only in totally helpless situations. God is not in the compass totally, actually. A fortunate few have come to understand God as the means or the goal. Now, only scriptures speak about God and not the scientific world, at least not yet. That the universe is created is accepted by most. However, scientists cannot explain what was there before Big Bang. Only scriptures help us in figuring that out. They say the God is the cause. He was there in the unmanifest form. And this much general knowledge is enough, is convincing enough for us to lead a religious life with devotion and faith. Spiritual life begins when I want to know more about God. I want to know more about myself. So we accept he was always there and he is the material and intelligent cause of creation, which means he must have created time and space also, right? Which means that he transcends time and space. Therefore, God is an infinite entity, not subject to arrival and departure. Slowly, we start to recognize that the deities we worship are only finite representatives of this God and not God himself. These deities with forms are called Saguna Ishwara and are mere provisions for a devotional and spiritual religious life. So who is Ishwara and what is Ishwara's nature requires a deeper study. We must inquire further. Saguna means that which has virtues, gunas, qualities. Therefore, Saguna Ishwara Upasana means meditation upon the Lord who has attributes. It also includes Manasa Japa, Manasa Parayanam Puja. This sadhana helps in conditioning our personality. It is a preparatory process and it's a stepping stone. It prepares our mind towards the inquiry into the real nature of God. And it's called Jnana Yoga, where we get the knowledge of this infinite God with no virtues or attributes. This God is referred to as nirguna Brahman. And it's the main topic of Vedantha. In the 7th chapter, we called it Para Prakriti. And because just being established in this knowledge, it's called Brahman Jnanam, and one can enjoy freedom here and now. Krishna wants exactly that for us. Liberation in this janma itself. That it is referred to as Jivan Mukti. He's not interested in us going to heavens and delaying moksha. And this is the method. And in this method, what do? We practice Saguna Upasana for some time. And having acquired enough qualifications on Jnana Yogyata, we switch over to Jnana Yoga. And that is exactly the approach of the 9th chapter. Krishna will speak on Saguna Ishwara Upasana for Chitta Shuddhi. Then he speaks about Nirguna Ishwara Jnanam or Vedanta Vichara as a path to liberation. And in the 9th chapter also, Bhakti is given as a solution in detail, how and why we must submit ourselves unto him at every step. Now, going to the text proper, in the first 3 verses, next slide, sorry. In the first 3 verses, Krishna introduces the subject matter, namely Ishwara Jnanam. Krishna says, I will clearly teach you both Saguna Ishwara, which he calls Jnanam over here, which is the Maya root of the lower nature of God. And then he says, I will teach you Nirguna Brahman, which is the higher nature of God and is called Vijnanam here. Krishna promises, after understanding and assimilating this knowledge, we will be released from the bondage of suffering. This is his promise. He advertises further this knowledge. For the prepared mind, he says it's easiest, susukham, but it is not accessible and will remain a secret, guhyatamam, for the unprepared mind. Therefore, it is called Raja Guhyam, the greatest secret. And at the same time, since this knowledge alone liberates a person, Krishna calls it Raja Vidya, the king of all knowledge. And this Raja Vidya, Raja Guhyam Yoga is the subject matter of the 9th chapter and also the title of this chapter. This knowledge is unopposed to dharma. It goes along the lines of dharma, and it is the greatest purifier because it removes the worst impurity of all. What is that? Ignorance. It guarantees against future impurities also. Atma Jnanam alone calls the bluff of the ahankara, the nucleus of all problems. It washes away our karma, sanchita agami. It takes away from the cycle of birth and death, removes all the psychological impurities in the form of raga, dvesha, kama, krodha. And it also guarantees against future impurities. I said that. Krishna confirms the benefits of this knowledge that can be directly realized here and now, not after death. Pratyaksha agagmam, he says. One more point Krishna mentions over here is that it's an important qualification that is required is Shraddha, faith. Keeping an open mind towards the scriptures and the guru. We must not reject the teaching or the teacher. Be patient until we understand. We can raise questions to clarify doubts, but not go about fault finding and being critical. Krishna says, if we reject the teaching, we will be missing the opportunity and we will continue in samsara. Nischaya vartante. Next slide. Beginning with the 4th verse and up to the 10th verse, Krishna explains the higher nature of God. This is the main part of the 9th chapter. Brahma swarupam or para prakriti. This is not absolutely new and has been introduced in the earlier chapters also. This portion is the essence of all Upanishads and the central theme of the 9th chapter. The first definition of the higher nature of God is para prakriti. Avyakta murti, he says, not perceptible. This God, the high nature of God, is not perceptible to the senses, to the eyes, ears, nose, skin, taste. So we can take it as it's formless, it's attributeless. And therefore, if anybody talks about God, seeing God with the eyes, do not dismiss that darshan, but we must understand that it is the darshan of the lower nature of God, part of Maya, Saguna Ishwara. Then Krishna comes to says, Sarvagata Aham Asmi. I am all-pervading absolute principle. Not Krishna as the body, but Krishna as the formless, attributeless, but pervades all beings. Not subject to time and space. Therefore, it is divisionless and changeless. As Nirgunam Brahman, God doesn't have a location. It doesn't go Brahma Loka, Vaikunta, heaven. None of these. Any God located in a place is to be taken as a symbol representing the real. What we can say is since he is all-pervading, he is in Kailasha and Vaikunta also. The third feature is mentioned here is I am the substratum, Matsthani Sarva Bhutani. The whole world of all things and beings are resting in me. I am the Vishwa Adhara. I am the supporter of the universe, and I am not supported by the world. I am ever the supporter, but I'm never supported. The fourth feature we come to is Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Interestingly, Krishna makes very contradicting statements in verses 4 and 5. He first says, I'm in all beings, I'm all pervading. Then he says, I support the world, but the world does not support me. All beings rest or exist in me. And then he says, the beings do not exist in me. Absolute contradiction. And then he says, see this as my glory. How is this possible? Krishna doesn't lie. If somebody has to ask if a dream is existent or not, we will say from the dreamer's angle, it is existent. But when you wake up and start looking at the dream from a higher standpoint, from the waker's point of view, it's not there. Where is the dream space? The food I ate in the dream has not filled my stomach. I'm hungry. The tiger who killed me is not here right now. I'm alive. So from the lower order of reality, it is there. But from the higher order of reality, it's not there. It was just an appearance, a projection. This unique thing is called mithya. Next slide. Mithya means experientially available, but factually non-existent. Therefore, by accepting the universe and then rejecting the universe, Krishna is pointing out that the world does exist, but it has got a lower order of reality. From the body standpoint, the world is existent, but from the Brahman standpoint, the world is non-existent. And this is called Mithya Jagat. And then Krishna says, may you appreciate this mystical divine nature of mine. May you recognize my higher nature is the only reality and the lower nature is only an appearance. It is dependent on my true nature. Brahma Satya Jagat Mithya. Next slide. Coming back to the same slide, the fifth feature which Krishna speaks about, he says, I am the Shrishti Sthiti Laya Karanam of this universe, which means I am the cause of the world. Who's this Krishna we are talking about? We are talking about Krishna with the higher nature of the God. I am the cause of the world. I sustain it and it resolves back into me. The world cannot exist without me, but I can exist without the world. I do not depend on the world. Like waves, they come out of the water, they sustain in the water, and then they go back into the water. Wave cannot exist without water. The sixth and the seventh feature is akarta abhokta. A question may arise, it's a corollary actually from all the other features which we took. A question may arise like, just like we get caught by our karma and get punyam and papam, does God also get caught by all his actions? So if Ishwara is the creator of the universe, then logically Ishwara is also a karta and a bhokta because he's creating this world and he's preserving this vast universe. A big task, right? Even the earthquakes must be his job. He quakes the earth. We did not do it. So Ishwara is responsible for many of them dying in the earthquake. So he will also have punyam and papam, right? Krishna says, I do not create anything. In my presence, the creation arises, exists, and resolves. I am not the doer. I am a karta, a bhokta. This leads us to the next feature of Nirguna Brahman, Sakshi Matram. Brahman is the witness principle. Hey Arjuna, I do not willfully do anything. In my presence, Maya does its function. Just like light that pervades and illuminates the hall. This light helps various actions in the halls, but it is unconcerned with whether the actions are good or bad. These actions do not taint the light in any which way. This is Sakshi Bhava, remaining without abhimana. Any sense of doership is called Sakshi Bhava. Another example is electricity. Gadgets can function according to their nature in the presence of electricity. Electricity doesn't make them do any other function. Like a bulb can only illuminate. A mic can only amplify a sound. A fan can rotate in the presence of electricity. Similarly, God does not determine the nature of thoughts. He only enlivens the thoughts. the nature of the thoughts generated are according to the nature of the instrument, the mind, and its prevalent gunas. Therefore, in the presence of consciousness, the mind will generate thoughts depending on the guna prevalent in the mind. Lord says, in my sheer presence, Maya projects this entire creation. The whole universe of things and beings, of moving and unmoving, Maya Adhyakshena. Simply put, Brahman doesn't play a physical, psychological, or a magical role in the whole drama of the universe that unfolds. Feature 9 is Asangatvam. Finally, Krishna says he is Asanga Swarupa. Asanga means even though Lord is the support of this entire world, the impurities of the world do not taint the Lord. He is detached, uninvolved, and unaffected. For example, take space. Any fragrant or foul smell remains in the air without attaching to the face. The fire exists in space, but does not burn the space. The water does not wet it. Same way, the Lord accommodates everything, including all good, bad, and pure and impure in the universe, but is never affected by any one of them. So these are the features of the higher nature of the Lord, that is Brahman. The next slide. Krishna points out in the 11th verse that why is there suffering in the world? Samsara karanam kim. What is the cause of this samsara? Krishna says ignorance. Incomplete understanding of the real nature of God is the cause of samsara. Due to ignorance of the real and what is unreal, what is eternal and what is not eternal, we have wrong expectations and misplaced search. I'm looking for happiness, peace, and security in the ever-changing world rather than God. Anything other than nirguna Brahman comes under Maya. It consists of gunas. It will have properties. The moment we come to properties, it is subject to change. There will be increase, or there will be decrease. Our own physical property, our complexion, our hair, whatever, it keeps changing. It is subject to time. Whatever is subject to time cannot give us security. Why? Because time will destroy it. Samsara is leaning on the changing rather than the changeless. Ignorance itself is not a sin, but perpetuating in ignorance in our lives is a sin. Krishna blatantly calls such people mudaha, foolish. Krishna says the ignorant take to my human form. When we wash the Lord, does it mean he is dirty? When we pray to the idol, does it mean he's not there at the other places? We can do all these rituals with personal God. It is good. But eventually we must graduate. Saguna bhakti is for chitta shuddhi, for mind cleansing. Without Saguna Ishwara, we cannot come to Nirguna Brahman. And without Nirguna Brahman, coming to Nirguna Brahman, it is incomplete spirituality. We all require Saguna Bhakti, but ultimately we must grow out of it. The next slide. So from verse 12 to 19, Krishna gives the remedy. And what's the remedy? Bhakti is given as the remedy. When we say bhakti, we should remember very clearly, bhakti is not one sadhana, but bhakti is a series of sadhana culminating in Jnanam. Bhakti must culminate in Jnanam if we want liberation. Bhakti cannot be divorced from knowledge. What are the three levels of bhakti? Kama Rupa Bhakti or Karma Yoga, Upasana Rupa Bhakti or Upasana Yoga, and Vedantha Vichara or Jnana Yoga. The first level of bhakti should be in the form of karma yoga, wherein we dedicate every action to the Lord, be an instrument of the Lord, do our swadharma, pancha mahayagna, convert every action as a service to God, expand our horizon, take selfishness out. This level of bhakti is in the form of karma yoga, which reduces anxiety, worry, and fear. World dependence comes down and God dependence goes up. And thereafter, we have to graduate to the next level of bhakti called Upasana Yoga. Because of the extrovert mind, we cannot absorb Vedanta. we must move inward. Karma has a knack of making us extrovert. Many people who have been very active cannot sit and study Vedanta. They are restless. But a time comes when we must turn away from that. We have to hand over the services to the next generation. Vairagyam towards the world. This bhakti is in the form of meditation, saguna meditation, and this is the second stage. It will help us to refine it further, no more emotional kneeling on the world. And then we come to the third and final stage of bhakti, which is called Vedanta Vichara Rupa Bhakti, the subtlest form of bhakti. Here we make an intellectual pursuit into the nature of God, into the nature of the world, and who am I? In chapters 1 to 6, we saw dealt with the real nature of Jivatma. Now in chapters 7 to 12, we are studying real nature of Paramatma. In chapters 13 to 18, we will see that they both are the same, Tattvamasi. I am Jivatma, we will see that Jivatma Paramatma Ekyam. I am that. So when the scriptures say bhakti leads to liberation, we should remember bhakti, which goes through all the three levels of sadhana. If we do only bhajana or meditation, we will not get jnanam. They are the initial stages of bhakti. We have to do consistent and systematic study of scriptures over a length of time under a guidance of a competent guru. Consistent, systematic study of scriptures over a length of time under a guidance of a competent guru. This is the highest level of bhakti, the culmination, where I come to understand God and I are one, where world is just an appearance. There is no two, there is one absolute reality. Through the prism of Maya, one reality appears as Jiva, Jagat, and Ishwara. Truth behind them is all is one, and I am that Brahman appearing as the manifold forms and names. Ajam nirvikalpam nirakaram ekam niranandam anandam advaita purnam. One more point. Next slide. Vedanta also classifies the seekers into three grades depending on the type of iśvara they appreciate. The one who worships Ekarupa, the first one is Ekarupa Bhakti. Most of us feel comfortable with this kind of worship, where we are able to isolate God with a precise form, distinct from other forms, for devotion with reverence. We continue to do Ekarupa Bhakti, we can continue to do Ekarupa Bhakti, but then we must recognize that these forms are just symbols. God does not end in the form. Once we progress a little bit through Shastra Vichara, we understand the entire universe of all beings and things are God. This is Aneka Rupa or Vishwarupa Bhakti. At the highest level of understanding is Arupa Ishwara Bhakti. This is Nirguna Bhakti. In the verses 16 to 19, Krishna elaborates this Vishwarupa Bhakti as a stepping stone. That is, learning to look at everything in the creation as the manifestation of the Lord, to see the divinity in all beings and things. It helps to eliminate pride and ignorance, promotes tolerance, and takes us away from dvesha, hating anything. In this chapter, Krishna takes only the beautiful and valuable and respectable things as his glories. He says, see me in the Vedic rituals, yagnas, in the mantras, in the food. Next slide, sorry. In the food, he says, see me as the intelligent cause of the creation and the material cause. And he says, no one created me. Pitamaham. I am the karma phaladata. I am Om and I am the Vedas, the knower and the known. I am your protector, your well-wisher. I am the inexhaustible seed. I am life, I am death. I am the form, I am the formless. I am Sat, Asat. I am the goal, I am everything. There is no other. These are beautiful verses. See the divinity in each and every aspect of the universe, not physically seen, but intellectually. The endless glories of one divine will be described even in greater detail in chapter 10. We will now listen to Dr. Rekha explain some of the most beautiful verses on Bhakti. I would like to thank all my team members who helped me from Param Vedantha and with their slides, with my script and words of encouragement. Thank you.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Continuing, Nita has already dealt, next slide please. Nita has dealt with the first four main topics, the focus on the higher nature of God, nirguna, iśvara, swarupam, and how we are in bondage or samsara because we don't choose Prakriti as the goal of our lives. Then we heard about the three levels of bhakti, Ishta Devata Ekarupa, Anekarupa, and Arupa Bhakti. We also learned that Bhakti Yoga is a means of liberation encompassing all three yogas, Karma Yoga, Upasana Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. In the next slide, we will learn more about Nishkama and Sakama Bhakti. Next slide, please. From the 20th to the 29th verses, Lord Krishna talks about the two types of bhakti, Sakama Bhakti and Nishkama Bhakti. These are what Ajnanis follow, and these are based on the motive or the bhavana behind the bhakti. In Sakama Bhakti, a person chooses artha or wealth or kama desire for material or finite goals. In Nishkama Bhakti, on the other hand, the goal is spiritual. Such a person uses karma and upasana for moksha or things that are connected with moksha, such as purity of mind. And the technical term for this is sadhana chatushtaya sampatti. In short, if an activity is chitta shuddhi pradana, for purity of mind, it is nishkama. If it is limited or so-called money pradana, it is a sakama activity. In the next slide, we will see that there are four types of bhaktas who are described in the scriptures. Next slide, please. And we can relate to most of them. So most of us initially look on God, looking at the bottom of the slide, we look on God as the means to the end, which is finite in nature. And then I am an Artha Bhakta. So I remember God only in times of distress, as most of us have done and we continue to do. I become an Artharthi Bhakta when I am not in distress, but I'm still very desirous of gaining material benefits. I want money, I want fame, I want the best job. So both these types of bhaktas, Artha and Artharthi, they use God as the means and not the end, and they are in samsara. A few of us, as we mature, might want God as the end or goal. And going up in the slide, so we become Jignasu Bhaktas who want to know more about God. They become Karma Yogis who practice right action with the right attitude. Lord Krishna repeatedly tells us that both Grihastas like ourselves and Sannyasis who give up family life, they can pursue this path. And in fact, in a very reassuring way, Lord Krishna says those in Grihastha ashrama are in fact more suitable for this kind of study. The highest of all, right on top, is the Jnani Bhakta. He is a realized sage who sees God as himself, Aham Brahmasmi, and he has no motive left in life. Next slide, please. So in the next slide, we learn about the two aspects of Sakama Bhakti. Next slide, please, which can be thought of as the rose with a stem which has the thorns intact. So there's a good aspect and a bad one. The good aspect of Sakama Manda Bhakti is when I earn a lot of punya, because I've chosen God as the means. I do a lot of pujas, I do a lot of yajnas in my lifetime. So when I die, I will surely go to the higher Swarga Loka, where I can enjoy extraordinary pleasures. They are sense pleasures, Laukikan Sukham, and this is what the scriptures promise. But what happens after that is the other side of the coin, and that is the darker side. Remember, when I'm in the higher lokas, I cannot earn any fresh punyas because I just exhaust the ones that are there already. So it's a bhoga bhumi. So when my punyas are exhausted, as they surely will, I have to return to the lower world of samsara, where I may be reborn either as a human again, or I could even be born as an animal or a plant, depending on the fructifying karma. So this is punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, and the cycle of death and rebirth goes on and on. So we understand that Sakama Bhakti is associated with spiritual stagnation. In the next slide, we see that Lord Krishna tells us in several verses that we should choose our goal in life very wisely and pursue it assiduously, because we have the great gift of free will that is unique to only human beings of all the things in creation. So to realize our supreme self, all of us need to identify why we are here and fulfill those purposes. The 4 goals of humankind in the scriptures, they're called Purusharthas. Purusha is the individual, Artha is the meaning or objective. So they are Artha, which has to do with material possessions, Kama, which is desire for pleasure, for power, for fame, Dharma, which is rightful duty, and Moksha, which is liberation. So what Lord Krishna tells us is that we have free will, we have to choose. It is stressed. We have to choose using our free will. God will not decide for us. And so to attain our goals, we also need another factor, and that is the grace of God, Ishwara Anugraha. Ishwara Anugraha is like sunshine. It's available. It falls on everyone equally. But we have to tap into it. We have to access it. And how do we do that? By following Bhakti Yoga. Similarly, we can pray to any limited Ishta Devata. But Lord Krishna says that we must realize that all such limited prayers, though they reach him, he is the infinite and he will encompass all the finite things. And knowing this, we can escape samsara. Next slide, please. So in verse 22, which deals with Nishkama Bhakti, we see that this is a verse that is often quoted. It's an important verse. Here Lord Krishna says, I will take care of the welfare of all those Nishkama Bhaktas for whom God is the end and not the means. Such a Bhakta, he does all the worldly transactions, but the ultimate goal of his life is very clear to him. And this occupies his mind throughout. And even when he is transacting in the world, his primary goal is always there. And this is called Ananya Bhakti. So this ultimate goal plays in the background like a tanpura plays with a musician. So our Swami Paramarthanandaji, he tells us to think of ourselves traveling on a train, for example, from Bangalore to Delhi. Now, as I go on the journey, I keep getting off at various stations on the way, either to stretch my legs or have a cup of tea. But always at the back of my mind, I know I need to get back onto that train. I can't miss it. And in fact, to this very end, I had earlier even bought the right ticket and got to the station on time. So I did everything that was needed to go to Delhi in a very single-minded way because I had work there. I had to go there. So as a corollary, Lord Krishna really tells us that we should understand that absorption in the Lord does not mean ignoring all other things in our life, our family duties, our worldly duties. We have to continue doing that. But when we have this main goal of God, we are called Tivra Mumukshus. And this is in Vedantic language. And in the Bhagvadgita, such a bhakta is called a Jignasu Bhakta. In the next slide, we see that to such a bhakta, Lord Krishna makes the promise, I will take care of your yoga and shema. Just trust me and you will be safe. So what does yoga mean? Yoga is what everybody needs early in life. The basic needs of life, food, clothing, shelter. And kshema is how we preserve what we have acquired. Both these are the basic pursuits of every person, as we all know. So when Lord Krishna says, leave the rest to me, we have to literally take a leap of faith. Next slide, please. The next verse, verse 26, is a beautiful verse where Lord Krishna asks us to be Jignasu Bhaktas. Next slide, please. And he says, Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam Yo me Bhaktya Prayachati Tad Aham Bhaktyupratam Ashnami Prayatatmana. So he says, with devotion, whoever offers me a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water, that devout offering of the pure-minded one, I accept. So what do we learn from this? That worship done with selfish sakama motives, they have rules and regulations in the way the rituals are performed. And these rituals are there in the scriptures too. And if they are not done properly, one has to repent or do prayaschita. There are a whole set of things that have to be done. So one can't take shortcuts if one is following that path. This is very restricting and may make many of us actually go away from worship altogether, which is not a desirable thing. And so, but, and there's a very big but, a nishkama mumukshu bhakta, who wants God as a result of his puja, he can offer anything. It could just be a flower that is there, a drop of water, just one fruit. And that's quite all right, because it represents his love or devotion, and he has no agenda. So again, it is stressed, the motive or attitude of the bhakta is important. Are we aiming at the infinite or are we aiming at the finite? And if it is the infinite, we should not feel bad, because it's just the love with which the offering is made that is most important, not the material value of the offering. Next slide, please. So Lord Krishna tells us, for such a bhakta, every moment, every act is sacred. Every act is an act of worship. It is such a beautiful thing. So if I am a Jignasu bhakta, any worldly or laukika karma or activity that I do, be it my daily prayer, any charity I do, any tapas, chanting I might do every day, or even my professional work that I do every day, if I dedicate it to the Lord as arpanam, then it becomes a puja. So what more can one ask for? So even a mundane act, such as eating, can become a puja. When I offer the food to the Lord inside the stomach, this is pran agni hotram. So basically, nishkama bhakti is an attitudinal change where every action I do ultimately leads me to liberation. So we then see that we have something wonderful. This would be the most beautiful way to live. And this is unique to the Vedic tradition. Next slide, please. So in the next verse, we see that Nishkama Bhakti and Karma Yoga, as Nita had described, they are synonymous. So how does this Nishkama Bhakti lead to liberation? Of course, going through Jnana Yoga. Nishkama is the spiritual desire for anything that promotes moksha. It is free of materialistic pursuits. To reiterate, the desire for purity and Jnanam is Nishkama or Mumukshu Bhakti. Karma Yoga has been defined earlier as right action with the right attitude. And what is the right attitude? Everything that I do is an offering to the Lord, iśvara arpana bhavana. Every result that happens is accepted cheerfully as prasada, Ishwara prasada buddhi. Here Lord Krishna says, Nishkama Bhakti involves the same. So Karma Yoga and Nishkama Bhakti are synonymous. From the standpoint of action, that is sadhana drishtya, it's called Karma Yoga. From the standpoint of attitude, bhavana drishtya, it's called Nishkama Bhakti. Such a bhakta transcends material punyam because he wants spiritual punyam. And spiritual punyam is really an opportunity to get a guru, an opportunity to study the scriptures, as we are so fortunate to have. And such a person will transcend material papam also, because Lord Krishna has reassured us that the rules of puja can be broken if one has the right attitude. So transcending material punyam is not a bad thing if we remember that both material punyam and material papam, they are sources of bondage that keep us in samsara. After this, one has to go through Jnana Yoga for liberation. And what do we understand by liberation? It is simply dropping the misconception through knowledge that the Lord is away from me. So it is a very simple thing. Next slide, please. Having thus defined and differentiated between Sakama Bhakti and Nishkama Bhakti at length, Lord Krishna very clearly wants us to choose Nishkama Bhakti as discerning individuals. Next slide, please. So we now come to the final verses of the chapter that deal with the glory of Nishkama Bhakti. So firstly, what is stressed is that Bhakti is for all people, from the novice to the advanced seeker, to those with personalities that may appear inimical, those who have indolence as part of their nature, selfishness. Now, these are swabhavas that people can't help, inferior gunas. We are born with these things. And also disadvantages such as lack of education. So Krishna says, don't worry. Bhakti is available for each one of us, those of us with advantages and those without. We also learn that bhakti can be started at any stage of life. So one need not worry that they have spent years without coming to this. They can start it right now. So without any previous qualification, we start at the first step, which is at the bottom of the staircase. And then we go upwards. The only thing to remember is the topmost step, the Gnana Lakshana Bhakti. That is something for which one has to prepare. One can't jump into that. So we can choose the appropriate level of bhakti depending on our maturity. We know how much we know, how much we have to learn, and then we go upward from that. So Krishna's promise, very heartening promise, is that if you are on the staircase before long, you will certainly change from the Artharthi Bhakta to the Jignasu Bhakta. And when you get knowledge, you will become a Jnani Bhakta. Next slide, please. The second advantage that Lord Krishna tells us is that all guilt also can be overcome with bhakti. We know none of us is perfect, and each one of us knows that. And many of us, when we take up spiritual study, we suffer from the problem of guilt associated with previous perceived wrongdoing, or to use a bigger word, papams, that we may have done in the past, because our consciences judge and constantly form self-opinions. And we learn that such feelings of guilt are a huge problem in the spiritual path because they lead to diffidence. And I don't need diffidence. I need a whole lot of self-confidence for any spiritual sadhana. So once I understand that my lifestyle is unhealthy in any way, and I decide to change and turn over a new leaf, that very decision makes me more saintly, is what Lord Krishna says. Bhajate mam ananya bhak. So without any wavering in the mind, with ananya bhakti and total surrender, the very decision to take the spiritual path is a turning point in a sinner's life, who is then immediately regarded as a sadhu or a saintly person. So we must remember the saying, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. Next slide, please. Finally, in the last verse of the chapter, another popular, beautiful verse, Lord Krishna describes the 5 stages in the life of a bhakta. So if we look at the slide from the bottom up, if I take myself to be a bhakta, starting from number 1 at the bottom, I will first develop devotion towards the Lord. That is mad bhakta bhava. Next, I will understand that worldly goals have limitations. God alone can give me peace, security, and happiness. So param ayanam. I make God the ultimate goal of my life. That is mat parayanaha. In the next stage, number 3 in the slide, manmana bhava. I will keep the ultimate goal in mind all the time. This is mumuksha bhava, like a musician with a tanpura always playing in the background. Now at number 4, I will then convert every moment of my life into worship to purify my mind, become a karma yogi. This is madhyaji bhava. Finally, right on top, Lord Krishna says, Mam namaskuru, surrender to me, but be humble. Don't feel you've reached the top. Remember to always be humble. And this is when I can tap into the grace of God which is very, very important in spiritual progress. Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mameva vaishyasi yuktvavam atmanam matparayana. Next slide, please. As Nita had mentioned earlier, we use bhakti or devotion commonly when we speak, but that is not bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga is a culmination of 3 types of upasana, karma yoga, 3 types of activity, karma yoga, upasana yoga, and jnana yoga. Just faith or devotion can only take one to a guru. That itself is a very, very big step. And with the help of the guru, we attain self-knowledge, which is our ultimate goal, by doing shravanam. Shravanam, as has been explained, is the consistent study of the scriptures for a length of time under a competent acharya. But following shravanam, I have to do mananam. So I must cogitate on what I've heard, what I've read. I must clear any doubts I have through introspection. And then I must get on to the next stage of nididhyasanam, where I have obtained so much of knowledge, but that is at the level of the intellect. How can I convert this into emotional strength so that it permeates every pore of my being, so that when something terrible happens, I won't say what, but I'll say so what. It's a change of attitude when the world no longer disturbs me. So only after Jnana Yoga is done can liberation be achieved, and that is our goal in life. Next slide, please. This brings us to the end of chapter 9. Om Tat Sat Iti Srimad Bhagvadgita Su Upanishadsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Raja Vidya Raja Guhya Yogo Nama Navamodhyayaha. Thank you, Hari Om. I would like to thank the School of Ancient Wisdom for giving us an opportunity as seekers under Dr. Timmappa Hegde's guidance to share what little we have learned with all of you. Thank you, Hari Om.
Thank you, Rekha ji. Very nice. And now, after this wonderful discourse, where I'm sure many of us have had our eyes and awareness opened, it's time now for the question and answer section. So, Hegde ji, would you like to say something before we continue with that?
This is not an easy chapter because especially there is a lot of the Upanishadic wisdom that is condensed from verses 4 to verses 10, which Nita had to do. And she did an excellent job in trying to summarize the Upanishadic insight, very complex verses in one slide. Then there was that whole approach to bhakti. And as I said, although we have a separate chapter called Bhakti Yoga, you will see the best verses and the best understanding of bhakti. And that was very nicely brought out by Dr. Rekha, and especially the last verse has been very nicely explained, which again will come in the 18th chapter in a very similar way in verse 65, the 18th chapter. I think both of them did a superb job in summarizing this chapter.
And now for